Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you have sent me by email at AskChrisShelton@gmail.com or have left for me in the comment section of my Q&A videos. If you send me questions otherwise, I'm probably am not going to get them in my queue. Email them, put them in the comment section, I'll get them in there. And we've been tearing that queue down and tearing it apart over the last few weeks. And it's actually getting back down to a manageable size now, which I'm very happy about. So we'll see about doing maybe one or two more live bonus episodes in the coming weeks as time permits. But we're definitely going to continue on with the regular weekly episode here as long as you guys have questions for me. So keep sending them to me and I will keep putting them in my queue. I wanted to put a quick note out. I really only do this around Christmas time, and it's really kind of silly of me. I've got merchandise. If you guys are interested in Christmas presents centered around Scientology, critical thinking type stuff, there is a link to my Spreadshirt store down in the links below here, critical merchandise. And y'all can check that out and maybe use it to gift other people in your life with some critical thinking and some, that kind of stuff. So anyway, check those out. You can put those logos and symbols and various things on shirts, hats, mugs, towels, whatever. Spreadshirt has some pretty interesting options down there, and it's been there this whole time. It's always there for you guys if you are interested in that kind of thing. It does help supplement my, the little tiny bit of income comes my way from that. So it's also good for supporting the channel. And speaking of, 'tis the season and all that, so I wanted to say, if you are enjoying my content and think this channel is worth something, go ahead and join me on Patreon or send me some love, buy me a cup of coffee, whatever. All right, let's get on with your questions. I did want to say that I really hope you guys will check out the Critical Conversations show that we did last night, Friday night, on the Danny Masterson trial on prosecuting crimes in cults, I called it. And it was really my response, my sort of soapbox about the interview that I got last week with the jury foreman from the Danny Masterson trial. So during that interview, I did not, respond or give him a lot of crap or editorialize on his views or anything or attempt to debate him. That wasn't necessary and wasn't appropriate for what we were trying to do, Tony and I, in doing that interview. But I had some things to say. And I have some very strong opinions about this trial and its outcome and the mistrial and why that happened. And we talked about that. So if you're interested in my take on it, and I was following it daily, I've been in touch with Tony, been in touch with other people who were in the courtroom who had things to say about it, and kind of put all that together and put it out there for you guys. So also, just so y'all know, we do a Friday live show right here, and it's a call-in show. And it's actually the reason I got this fancy equipment is so I could do that show. So my wife and I have been doing that for a couple of years. Critical Conversations every Friday night at 6 o'clock Denver time right here. So enough plugs. Let's get to your questions. Jonas Vinther. If Hubbard said and believed that exposure to OT3 was harmful or even deadly to people, how on earth could the man justify writing Revolt in the Stars, which is obviously the subject of that screenplay? Did he seriously not consider that the Scientologists who paid thousands of dollars to reach OT3 would be extremely surprised, angry, and confused that he was now selling this pitch to Hollywood? What if the film blew up like Star Trek or Star Wars and the Wall of Fire was now something everyone knew about? All right, I love clearing up these confusions about OT level 3 and the public's understanding of them because it's nuanced. You're gonna have to understand that there's a plus and a minus here. It's not all just this sort of simple idea of, oh, you've read about Xenu, you've heard about Xenu, now you're dead. It doesn't work like that. And so, well, how does it work? Well, here's the thing. Hubbard was playing a little mind game with everyone in regards to this idea of revolt in the stars, or revolting in the stars, if you will. It's an awful, awful story. And it's really not even a screenplay. It's more of a novella or a short story, really. But it could be turned into a screenplay easily enough. But really, I think it's more of what they might call a treatment or a story version of of this concept of a modern Earth society, and discovering something under the water that tells them the whole story about the history of things here on Earth, and how this guy Xenu was involved in a space, opera, very larger than life story of mass genocide, interstellar genocide and ruination, and the Revolt in the Stars story is Xenu's story, and the story of the Galactic Confederation or Markabian Confederation, and its downfall. So the characters are simple Simon Stupid. They are kindergarten level complexity. I mean, it's a really badly written tale. But when I said Hubbard was playing mind games with everybody, what I meant is that Hubbard considered and said that the material in our distant past is something everybody on Earth, all the people here, all the spiritual beings here, we all have it in common. We've all been through those incidents. And because we've all been through those incidents, we all have and share common restimulators, things that will remind us forcibly, or maybe very, very subconsciously, of these past episodes of intense trauma and pain and unconsciousness. And the Xenu story and the whole genocide of that is very definitely a mass incident of massive pain and unconsciousness. So we all share that, and therefore there are pictures, words, ideas that can be fed to people that will re-stimulate, that will make a person feel certain ways or turn back on perceptions or feelings or pains and emotions from those earlier incidents. And Hubbard believed that this could be used. This was what auditing is all about, is going in and rehashing it and taking it apart and blowing all of those pains and unconsciousnesses and emotions and all the negative stuff connected with all of that. But Hubbard also decided that this could be used for marketing and that you could subtly re-stimulate people with certain imagery and certain pictures, certain ideas, and they would be somehow hypnotically drawn to the material because it would be, oh, something's important about this, some sort of subliminal sort of thing. And Hubbard attempted to, have this, and the whole thing is based on a fantasy. It's all Hubbard's fever dream, but he thought this stuff was so powerful that it could be used in Scientology on the covers of their books to bring people in, to entice them in. This is why a volcano is on the cover of Dianetics, because volcanoes feature so prominently in the OT3 narrative. This is why there are guys in white helmets and outfits, white uniforms on some of the other books, or why there's the caveman eating the thing on the History of Man book. These were all meant to be restimulative and to subconsciously or subliminally draw people in. Subliminal probably isn't the right word, but subconscious restimulation. So that's part of Hubbard's thinking. You have to understand all of that. And Jeff Hawkins talks about this at length in an interview I did with him years ago, which you guys can look up, where he talked about how this was part of Scientology's marketing strategy, according, as directed by L. Ron Hubbard. So, understanding that, in 1977, when Star Wars came out, L. Ron Hubbard looked at the success of that movie and went, well, obviously this movie is successful because it's restimulating people's whole track memories, the memories from way back when. That's called the whole track in Scientology, memories earlier than this lifetime. And so it's a raging success. People love Star Wars, right? Because it's restimulating the hell out of them. And because, of course, it's a good story. Well, L. Ron Hubbard thought he could do one better. And he thought, well, if this was so successful, we should ride this magic carpet ride, make a lot of money, get a very popular product out there, and get a lot of name recognition for Hubbard, and re-stimulate these people so that they will, pursue a Scientology education or endeavor. So Revolt in the Stars was his sort of brainchild for that, and he wrote it, and they tried very, very hard to get the movie made. Now that's the sort of summary backstory for Revolt in the Stars, and Hubbard never imagined that it was going to kill people because he left out of the story all the important bits as far as Scientology is concerned. And I've tried to get this across to people, and let me do so again. There's the sci-fi story of OT3. Planets, spaceships, DC-10s, glycol alcohol injections and putting people to sleep, and Xenu, and this whole, sort of genocidal story, and the good guys, the loyal officers who saved the day and didn't really save the day, but at least toppled Xenu within a few years of this whole thing going down. And some of them, Hubbard claims, some of these loyal officers, surviving all the way to now and coming back as Sea Org members. Right? Well, the motto of the Sea Org is "We come back." Yeah. And he meant it like that. It's a very open context statement, but that is the motto of the Sea Org. So Hubbard decided that the sci-fi elements in the narrative story of the OT3 incident could safely be told. And it would be only mildly restimulative to people, because what they don't get in that story is any hint or inference about body thetans. And it's the body thetans that are the important part of the Xenu OT3 story. Xenu isn't the important part. No one in Scientology really cares that much about it. What they care about is the effects, the consequences of that incident. And that's where the body thetans come in. And Hubbard doesn't go anywhere near the fact of body thetans, the treatment or methodology of body thetans, or the resolution of body thetans and how they're going to be gone. None of that, and none of the technique of how to get rid of the body thetans, none of that is in Revolt in the Stars. And that's the part that's going to kill you. I actually looked it up and decided to pull up Hubbard's actual handwritten notes on this. And what he said is, when through with his crime, loyal officers to the people captured him. He's talking here about Xenu. Captured him after 6 years of battle and put him in an electronic mountain trap where he still is. They are gone. The place, Confederation, has since been a desert. The length and brutality of it all was such that this Confederation never recovered. The implant is calculated to kill, by pneumonia, etc., anyone who attempts to solve it. This liability has been dispensed with by my tech development. One can freewheel through the implant and die unless it is approached as precisely outlined. The freewheel, quote unquote, auto-running on and on, lasts too long, denies sleep, etc., and one dies. So be careful to do only incidents 1 and 2 as given, and not plow around and fail to complete one thetan at a time. So, sort of semi-translating this here, the point I'm trying to make in reading Hubbard directly on this exact point is he doesn't say knowledge of this incident is what kills you. It's trying to solve the implant, which is auditing. You have to address the incident and address the body thetans telepathically one by one by one and exorcise them, kick them out, get them gone from you. Because they're your body. They're the thing that makes up your perception of your body. And you got to get rid of these body thetans for you as an individual little spirit to be free, because they're all glommed onto you. Kind of like you imagine a beekeeper with a bunch of bees all over him. You know what I mean? It's like, ugh. Got to get those things plucked off one at a time. And that's the important part about what is revealed to Scientologists. They, you know, again, they don't care about the whole genocide and Xenu. That stuff all happened 76 million years ago. Who cares? It's, what does this have to do with me? Oh, I got all these body thetans I got to deal with. Ah. And if you don't address these things properly and try to just run back, see, Scientologists he talks here about running this. That means that you're actually applying a Scientology technique or process to that incident to recall it, go through it, remember it. But there's more to OT3 than just remembering or recalling or reliving the implant. It's addressing the body thetans and getting them off. That's the hard part, and that's the part that takes a while, and that's the part that eventually goes to OT4, 5, 7. All of those levels address body thetans, and OT7 takes years to get through. So 3 is your introduction to all of this. It's like, oh, this is what the bridge is going to be about now. And that's what you start doing. And it's the freewheeling through the implant that'll kill you. This freewheel, this auto running, this like, oh, let me contemplate this, think about this, dive into it, try to take it apart, try to disassemble the implant on my own without paying attention to what Hubbard said to do. If I do that, that's what's going to kill me, because I'll never sleep. I'll get hopelessly restimulated, over-restimulated, and my body won't be able to cope with it. And I'll kill myself. I'll just die. My body will just wear itself out. That's how people die because of OT3. So, you know, you or I could theoretically hear about this whole incident and go, oh, wow. Well, let me see if I can take that seriously enough to actually start thinking deeply about it and try to audit it with Scientology or Dynetics processes and start diving into it as though it's real memory and it's happened to me and I'm going to go through it and relive it. That's where, excuse me, that's where the danger would come from. Unless, of course, just talking about it like this is enough to kill me. We'll see. Anyway, that's the deal with that. I hope that my explanation here was clear, or clear enough to be understood, that it's not the story in Revolt in the Stars that's going to get you. It's the actual running of the incident. And I hope that breakdown helps clarify that sort of once and for all. Steve Wood. I know a Scientologist who is completely anti-perfume and cologne, but he was not like this before becoming a Scientologist, which led me to write to you about this topic. I seem to remember, and it may have been on your show, that Hubbard had some totally strange ideas about perfumes and colognes and was absolutely against them. Can you shed some light on this very strange topic? Hey, Steve. Yeah, of course I can. In fact, I decided that rather than talk about it out of my own memory as I've done before, I would just go straight to the L. Ron Hubbard on this. First, a little background. This was mainly just for Sea Org members. This was originally issued. What I'm going to read to you was originally issued as a flag order. It was a directive from Hubbard that was just for Sea Org members about scented products. And then it was converted over into a bulletin so that all Scientologists would have access to it. And apparently it was originally written back in 1984. So this was actually end-of-life writing for Hubbard, and this was straight from Hubbard. No reason to believe that this came from anybody else. And so here are a couple of quotes from this issue. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's 2 pages long. But here are some things that Hubbard had to say about it. And he relates it back to psychiatry, because he's talking about marketing and advertisers, and Hubbard was absolutely, hated psychiatry in any way, shape, or form, not just psychiatric practice in hospitals or in medicine, but any influence of psychiatry or psychology, such as on Madison Avenue with advertisers. And he was always talking about how it's psych influenced and how that's one of the reasons why the planet's going downhill. And he's talking here about the fact that that smell comes from particles. It's not a gas. It's very, very, very tiny particles that your nose is picking up. So he says, So when psych-influenced marketing, and he's referring here to the fact that you can get a magazine that has perfume in it. You can go to a store and there's perfume in the air. Even going and getting your clothes dry clean, they put some perfume in it. Like, it's everywhere. Hubbard is like, the world's going crazy with this stuff. And he says, so when psych-influenced marketing advisors begin to spread junk around in the atmosphere, one soon gets a fully contaminated planet. Odor particles do not just evaporate. They have to blow away and settle somewhere, or get washed down by rain and get into the water systems and so forth. One of the worst things about these fragrances is that they hide other smells, and a person who is aware seriously objects to having all natural odors of things masked. It is part of one's identification process of objects and areas. In short, it's annoying. And he's not completely off base about that, and that's how he connects with his audience, right? But he says here that the danger of fragrances of that nature being spread all over the place is that they can hide toxic or even lethal substances in areas. And the psychs on the track, okay, this is in the past, the psychs, who have been around for a long time and originally came from the planet Farsec. Let's remember, this is L. Ron Hubbard talking. And the psychs on the track used such scents for exactly that purpose. So this fragrance thing is one of the tricks of the trade of psychs. Here he goes on and talks about how, did you ever notice that after you had been around one of those odors for a while, you ceased to smell it? Well, that's because perfume and fragrances are basically paralytics of the olfactory nerves. That's a lie. That is completely not true. But Hubbard gets away with saying it, right? Because he connects the dots to, oh yeah, I stopped smelling that perfume smell. Why is that? Well, if you don't know otherwise, you could be fooled by this. Hubbard goes on to say, they are, if you please, a sort of tranquilizer. They drastically cut down awareness, and when one is fairly alert in his senses shop, it is like being gassed with nitrous oxide or something. So that's why these people don't notice the smells in things, and why they put up with these horrible stinks in detergents and other products. You may think, he says, you may think I am being a bit extreme on this subject, but it's just that I can hear better and see better and smell better, and apparently I detest a monotone sensory perception continuously hammered at me. When I walk in the park, I want to smell the flowers, not some soap company's stinking counterfeit perfume. And he then goes on to talk about allergies to these things and such like that. So that's, I thought you might appreciate it sort of straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, on this, Steve. Because that's why Scientologists get on with this, is Hubbard spins, that the annoying factor of it, and it's true, it can be annoying. But then he connects it with something that's completely not true. The reason that you stop smelling things has nothing to do with that being a paralytic. It has to do with the fact that it's called familiarization. Your brain stops telling you about things that are present in the environment that are there constantly. You don't have to keep hearing about or smelling or tasting or seeing them. If your brain is because it's not a new thing that it has to predict newly and decide on and figure out, right? The brain's trying to constantly operate on a predictive mechanism of what's new and different and novel in the environment. That's what it's always looking for. And so when something becomes habituated or normal in your environment, you stop paying attention to it, because it's not that your body is not smelling or tasting or sensing it anymore. It's that your brain is not bothering you with that detail anymore. That's my simple Simon explanation for what's going on with the brain there and why it is that you don't get that perfume smell. I just thought I'd throw that out there, since I said what Hubbard was saying was a lie. Well, let me tell you the truth as I understand it. So I'm sure we'll get comments on this, and I think it'll be kind of interesting to hear what other people have to say about this. But there's my answer for you, Steve. R.R. Smith. I understand that auditing changes your memory. How and how much would auditing change your memory? Would Masterson have a truer memory of the events than the Jane Does that had auditing? I'm really out of date on how hypnotism works, but it used to be that you could not testify in court if you had used hypnotism to remember something. Also, there are times when you have sounded like I can't trust any of my own childhood memories. All right, RR, thank you for this. I actually interviewed a neuroscientist on the topic of memory because I'm not a memory expert when it comes to the neuroscience of it, and I wanted somebody who was. And so we had interesting discussions about the nature of memory, and you can find those a few years ago in my Sensibly Speaking podcasts. Jonas Kaplan, Dr. Jonas Kaplan was the neuroscientist that I interviewed. And we had some great talks about all of this. And it really sort of helped inform my understanding of the malleability, the plasticity of memory, the fact that memory is something you put back together each time you go back to it from a disparate collection of things in your mind. It's not a matter of a slate of pictures, or that your mind is remembering things like a film strip. It doesn't work like that. It's working by recombining things. And this is why we have memory holes and memory problems, is because sometimes those memories just go and they are gone and they cannot be reconstructed, or there's damage to the brain that can happen. There's other kinds of neurochemical damage that can happen that can mess with your ability to reconstitute memories. Drugs and drug residuals can mess with the neural structure of your brain and cause you to have memory issues. So there's a lot of different things. And of course, we get to, real pathology with memory when you have things like Alzheimer's, where the neurons are just breaking down physically. And so there's not going to be those connections possible anymore, or at least not that way. And yet, despite all of this, the brain has this amazing plasticity, this ability to reform and reconnect and have other parts of it pick up the slack, pick up the pace, pick up pieces here and there. If this part breaks down, this part can take over. It's really interesting stuff. So there isn't a lot of, I don't feel that I'm on like concrete ground when I describe or talk about how memory works. It's still the subject of intense study and something that we are still figuring things out on. But what I can talk about is how trauma and coercive control and interpretation of events has everything to do with how you remember things too, right? How we see things now, how we saw things in the past, colors our perceptions. Something can be hostile in one context and friendly in another, and that's going to affect our emotional reactions, and that's going to affect our memory of the situation because of the different brain modes that you can go into. If you're terrified, afraid, think you're in danger, you're going into fight or flight mode. Your memories and the things that are going to be important about that incident are probably going to be a little bit different than falling in love and the cozy, fun, euphoric feeling of that, where, the world is your oyster, everything is beautiful, the sun is shining, the clouds are parting. You've never felt better about everybody and everything. Well, the world isn't any different. You are. And your perception of the world is different because of how you are approaching the world. And therefore, your memories of those times in your life are going to be colored by that and affected by it, right? So then you say, okay, well, does auditing change memory? You bet it does, because it spins all kinds of new interpretations on events in your past. You'll look at or run through an engram that you might have had when you were 5, when you got hit over the head by something, and you might develop, like a Polaroid picture, memories because you're being demanded to. And you're being told that all those memories are there for you to access. Well, maybe that's true and maybe it's not. But as a Scientologist or somebody who's getting Dianetics auditing, this is what you're told. And you're told with with direct certainty, those memories are there. And you're going to recall them. And we're going to run through them. And you're going to relive them. And that's how we're going to release the trauma and the engram. Is you're gonna move to the beginning of the incident and tell me when you're there. Okay, and then you're gonna move through the incident, and then you're going to tell me what happened, right? And you're gonna describe it as though you're living that moment all over again. And that's the Dianetic process. And you go back over and over and over that incident. So you are told, remember the incident, and there is no quarter given. If you're like, well, I can't remember it, I don't have any certainty on it, keep going, keep going, keep going. And you're going to develop a memory, and whether that memory that you develop is real or not is anybody's guess. That's the thing about this that's so crazy and tricky, right? Is memory is malleable. Memory and imagination are indistinguishable from one another in our mind's eye. There are no tags. There's no hash mark on something you imagined versus something you're remembering. We use the same brain mechanisms to relive things in our imagination, to create and imagine a future with our memory, to create and imagine a past, and yet these things can combine and collide. And that is why this is tricky stuff, and why our memories are something that it's really, it's fine that we have memories. It's clearly a function of our brain to remember things, and especially remember traumatic things. So it's not wholly unreliable, but it's really best served. We are best served with memory if we have some kind of physical representations or objects or records or indications that are more reliable, I guess you could say, right? To connect those memories to. So then, because I think all of us have had the experience of, oh, I remember this thing, and you've been telling people for years, when I was 7 years old, blah, blah, blah happened to me, or when I was 9, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody pulls out a scrapbook one day, or your mother happens to be in the room one day, and it's like, that wasn't when you were 9, that was when you were 11, or here's here's this picture, and clearly it shows this thing happening, but look, you were 6, you weren't 9, that was 3 years earlier, right? I mean, we've all had that rude awakening that, oh my God, right? I've been remembering this totally wrong. I've gone back and, we talk about how when you go back and look at it shows that you watched when you were a kid, and it ruins your childhood, right? Because what does it do? It corrects your memories. You've been feeding yourself a story for years that you absolutely believed was true, and you go back and see, oh, it actually wasn't that. I remembered it wrong, but I was remembering it wrong over and over and over again and reinforcing the wrong memory, and now your childhood's ruined. That kind of thing. And that, of course, encapsulates a lot of what I've been talking about here, because our childhood also includes, emotional content and feelings and all of that, not just the exact incident as it happened. Anyway, so I think you guys get what I'm talking about here. So as far as auditing changes memory because it installs false memories. It can install imagination as memory. And this is where John Attak's description of hypnotism as guided imagination becomes really useful, because that is what auditing is you are guiding a person's imagination especially when it comes to, incidents that happened 76 trillion years ago. But we don't even have to go that far to invent memories. We have lots of examples in and out of Scientology of false memory syndrome, where people are made or coerced or coaxed into remembering things that never happened or didn't happen the way they thought they happened or remembered them happening. And auditing is just another mechanism or way of coercing or coaxing a person into that kind of headspace. And they can become quite certain that those things that they're imagining are true are literally true. I sure did. I had all kinds of things I remembered when I was in Scientology auditing that I know now has absolutely no basis in fact at all. So as far as comparing Masterson and the Jane Does because of their auditing, that is no index to use of any kind. And Masterson, by the way, has had plenty of auditing himself, including security checking, without any question. I mean, it's 100% certain that the Church of Scientology has very precise records out of Danny Masterson's mouth of what happened, and out of the Jane Does of what happened from the differing perspectives. Which one is more accurate? It's anybody's guess, but auditing is not going to be a measure of accuracy for anybody's memory one way or the other. And that's what I can say about all that. Catherine Salon. I heard today of the passing of Kirstie Alley. I was surprised that she was only 71, which is considered pretty young nowadays in my opinion, and that she died of cancer. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Kirstie OT8? Why are so many established Scientologists dying of cancer? Is it something to do with their training or perhaps the underlying stress of being part of that cult? I'd love to hear your opinion on this matter. All right, Catherine, thank you for this question. I have a few points on this, and I'll go down them real quick. First off, let me say that I was actually sorry to hear about her passing. Kirstie Alley is somebody that I remember fondly, even if her end of lifetime was, becoming a sort of Twitter hag on social media where she got really nasty with people from time to time, especially critics of Scientology. That's not the part of her that I choose to remember or think about, because she was, in the best Star Trek movie ever, Wrath of Khan, and she was wonderfully funny in a number of things, Cheers, and even those awful Look Who's Talking movies. Hell, I enjoyed them when they came out. And you guys are liars if you say you didn't either. And we got a lot of laughs, and she was very entertaining, and she provided a lot of funny comedy and entertainment to a lot of people over years. And she had a good heart, and she wanted to help. And a lot of her nastiness came out of the bitterness of not realizing those goals. And she went down the wrong path of Scientology. And really, that's just kind of a bummer that she did, but she had a decent life anyway. And that's what I can say about her in terms of, obituary comments. But as far as your questions go, there's a few things. One, Scientologists, especially OTs, neglect their own medical care. They tend to think, because of their status as Scientologists and as OTs and as trained Scientologists, that they know more and better than doctors do and modern science does. And they're reinforced in this belief by the continuing droning on of L. Ron Hubbard's voice in his lectures, telling them exactly that medicine and science and the medicos out there don't really know much about what they're doing. They're good enough for patching up a broken bone or healing a cut in the arm, but otherwise they're kind of useless. And when it comes to major diseases like cancer, leukemia, bad eyesight, etc., conditions or disorders, Scientology is really what you want to solve things with. In fact, there's even an issue in Scientology called Solve It with Scientology, where he says that you need to use auditing techniques to deal with problems people have. That's really the only, that addressing the spiritual problems is the only way to address or affect a permanent change in the situation. Because if you don't address the person spiritually, they're just going to keep creating these chronic illnesses and problems and diseases for themselves, because all of these have a psychosomatic origin story. They're all coming from the spirit reflecting itself or impinging itself on the body and creating these conditions. Okay. And that's why Scientologists believe that they are at cause. They are the ones who are in the driver's seat as far as the condition of the body goes, and they need to address the spiritual factors, and that's what'll cure the body, not go see a doctor. Now, at the end of this, Kirstie Alley did go see a doctor, and she did, I believe, pretty quickly after the diagnosis. If I heard properly, I didn't dive into all the details of the story, but what I heard was that she had gotten some really top flight care, but it had come on very quickly and sort of overwhelmed her body, and she died off. So you don't have, generally speaking, with Scientologists, a regular course of physical therapy or treatment or examination. They're not keen on going and getting their yearly physicals and keeping up on their tests and monitoring their labs and stuff like that. They don't do that, right? Most Scientologists I know eschewed and even, sort of ridiculed that kind of thing, because I'm not PTS. And that's the last thing on this I was going to bring up, which is this business of being PTS, a potential trouble source, meaning that they are connected with a suppressive person. And this is why you see Scientologists run and cower and hide from people they think of as SPs or suppressive people like me, people who criticize Scientology. we're criminals, we're antisocial personalities, we're psychotic as far as Scientologists are concerned. And they avoid us like the plague because they don't want to be connected to us, because if they become tainted or corrupted by us and our influence, they become PTS, potential trouble sources. That's the condition. That's how Hubbard kept people away from listening or hearing or talking to people like me or Leah or Mike or Tony or Karen or Aaron or any of us. Why do Scientologists avoid us like the plague? Because they think we're going to give them the plague. Because if they're influenced by us or corrupted by us, then they could become sick and die. Not that I'm fatal to them. They don't necessarily, that would be an ultimate sort of consequence of it, but it's a consequence. It's there. It's real. The threat is real. And as far as Scientologists are concerned, okay? So anyway, so this is a factor as to why they do or don't get medical care and proper medical treatment, is all of these things kind of wrapped up. So hope that clarifies and answers the question there, Catherine. Boobarella. So when you're in the Scientology bubble, you see Hubbard as source, which takes on a monumental stature. It's as if he's the grand architect of culture, the most influential person ever, and one can start to think that he was behind stuff he wasn't. It can seem that a lot of other movements and media products and games, even academic subjects, were created as derivatives and offshoots from his groundbreaking research. Scientologists can start to even see proof of his genius in new inventions and discoveries, inwardly crediting Ron. It seems this is a point of cult think that is common, but not necessarily mentioned that often. The subtle way that psychological totalism can make one nutty, likely even pathologically so. What are some things you used to think Ron influenced or made that he wasn't credited for? Did you ever have this thinking pattern? All right, interesting question, and not necessarily as common as I think you might imagine it to be from the way you put your question there, but it is definitely a phenomenon that happens, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's interesting. The first thing that came to mind for me was actually the subject of organic sounds in music and connecting those electronically with a synthesizer. And Hubbard wrote about this in the late 70s and decided to score one of his technical training films using natural sounds, crickets and owls hooting and wind blowing and things like that, and programming this into a synthesizer, which was fairly new tech at the time. And Hubbard thought that this was going to be a really big thing, and I guess it kind of is, but it's not something Hubbard invented. And Hubbard said in writing about this that he didn't follow trends. He was a setter of trends. He was a trend setter. And this was something he was going to, contribute to the music world, and it was going to be revolutionary, and he was going to set trends with this. Well, I never saw any trends being set by Hubbard of any kind. But that phrase kind of stuck in my mind. I was always like, really? That's interesting. And I didn't really observe trends in society being set by Scientology, but I did believe that because of our existence as a group and because of the influence that we had had as a group on world affairs or on the theta and theta ratio and all that kind of stuff, that our existence had prevented the end of the world, and that Hubbard had written about how the oil crisis or trade or how various other factors were imploding our planet and our society, and the energy crisis and all that. This is all back from the 1960s and 70s. Overpopulation. Hubbard claimed that this was actually a very underpopulated world, but the technology on it was so primitive that we weren't dealing with our resources well. We were poisoning the sky and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, he kind of tried to glom on to trends that were going on and hype Scientology as a solution to these problems. And it had me believing, when I was a Scientologist, that our mere existence was preventing the collapse of society and the planet because of what we were doing, okay, in some nebulous kind of fashion that I never would have been able to explain in terms of where the rubber meets the road. I couldn't have told you anything we were actually doing. It was more this nebulosity in my mind, right? That we were just this amazing group doing amazing things. So that's why, while I acknowledge that the question asks about something that I think does happen, it didn't really happen to me that way. But I did see other people credit Hubbard for all kinds of things going on in society. And maybe the biggest one, the biggest influence that we thought was a direct result of Scientology, and if Scientology wasn't around, this wouldn't have happened, was the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was absolutely, in our world, credited to Scientology and the release of OT8. And that was cause effect, right? We release OT8, OT8 start auditing, the Berlin Wall comes down, and the end of the Cold War. What? Right? And that was something we all believed in very hard. So I don't know, maybe not as complete an answer as you were looking for, but that's what I've got for you. All right, let's do some flash answers. Terry, Scientology has the cross-like symbol on the top of the facility, but they also have the two triangles with the S through them. Is there a special meaning to that symbol? Hey, thanks for asking. Quite simply, the S stands for Scientology, and the top triangle is symbolic for the KRC triangle, knowledge, responsibility, and control. And the bottom triangle is the ARC triangle, affinity, reality, and communication. And the ARC triangle is supposed to be the component parts of understanding. So if you have ARC for something in an ultimate sense, you will understand it in an ultimate sense. The KRC triangle is something Hubbard used more for executives or managerial type people, and it was about controlling people and again, taking responsibility for things. It's knowledge, responsibility, and control. And these factors are interrelated. So the more knowledge you have of something, the more responsibility you can take for it, the more control you can have over it, that kind of relationship. So those two triangles are pretty important in Scientology, and that's why they are part of the logo of Scientology. Jonathan Perry. Hubbard was very vague about things, but I'm curious if he ever described what some of the invader force aliens looked like. Did he just leave it up to your own imagination, or did he ever mention that in lectures or the OT levels? I would assume there would have been many species in his reality. Okay, Jonathan, thank you for this. What I remember were very vague descriptions of the invader forces. And invader forces are basically other species or other races of beings out there in the stars who have advanced along technologically and have started reaching out and invading other areas of the universe. And Hubbard said that this has been going on for trillions and trillions of years. And there's like 5 or 6 main invader forces out there that he sort of described or talked about, but it was always in the vaguest of ways. He referred to them as electronics people, for example, which meaning they had developed a high level of technology and electronics, and they could use electronics to trap or imprison spiritual beings. And I always relate that back to Ghostbusters. If you want to know what does that look like, it looks like Ghostbusters. You got electronics that nobody here on Earth has in order to do a thing, which is capture a spiritual entity and put it in a box. How do you do that? With special electronics. So that's why I thought Ghostbusters was such a great example or analogy for that. As far as what they appeared or looked like, again, vague descriptions, great big hands, claws for hands, sort of ugly or hideous to behold, or insectoid or something. I mean, that would be about as far as Hubbard would go in describing these things. And he described different invader forces in different ways. Again, I don't remember all the different things he said, but it was, again, very vague, broad sort of descriptions of them, nothing super specific. Ryan Hewitt. At some point while traveling Scientology's Bridge to Total Freedom, a person has full cause over the messed universe. Do Scientologists think these people can move the e-meter needle? How do they square these abilities with the infallibility of the e-meter? Theoretically speaking, yes, an OT could move an e-meter needle around, but they really only have the ability. I think Hubbard actually addressed this in the lecture once. is, you can hit the needle on the dial with a beam, with an electronic beam, but it's just going to knock it around on the dial. It doesn't look like an organic needle reaction. And when you're trained to use an e-meter, you can tell very quickly the difference between a person squeezing the cans or rubbing their feet on the ground or doing different body things in order to move the needle around. It has a distinctly different character or reaction or response than when a person's just sitting there holding the cans and the needle responds to the resistance to the electronic flow over their body. Kind of two different animals. And a person, Hubbard said, or you can imagine that a thetan bopping a needle around with tractor beams or pressor beams or something, it's gonna look unnatural. So even if they were trying to fool the auditor by hitting the needle, it wouldn't work. And they wouldn't, but the fact of the matter is they're not in a headspace where that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get gains and results with Scientology, and they need the meter to work. And so they're not going to mess with it in an effort to try to mess with their auditing or anything. I mean, they're paying for that time. So anyway, that's there you go. All right. So that is our show for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching. And I hope you guys are having a great holiday season. And I hope you continue to have one. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.